Well, hello, and a very warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn show with me, Andrew Eborn. And news has just broken that Tommy Robinson has been cleared of terrorist offence. I'm joined by Ben Habib. Hello, Ben.
Evening.
Um, just to fill in the facts here, Tommy was charged for failing to comply with a duty under what Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act of 2000 after being stopped at the Channel Tunnel in Folkestone on July the 28th, 2002, and he was refusing to hand over his PIN. Judge Goose cleared Robinson of all charges, stating he could not be sure the police stop was lawful or in accordance with the statutory purpose of the law used. A couple of key quotes, and then I'll get your reaction. He stated that the stop gave the impression of an arbitrary decision based on who you are, i.e., who Tommy is or Stephen. He concluded that it was actually what you stood for and your beliefs that acted as the principal reason for the stop. I cannot put out of my mind that it was actually what you stood for and your political beliefs that acted for the principal reason for this stop. He noted that the officers involved appeared fundamentally unclear about their powers, had no real recollection of questions asked during the 40-minute stop, and failed to record clear reasons for selecting Robinson. His barrister, Tommy Barrister, was Alistair Williams KC. He argued that the stop was politically motivated and the predominant influence on the officer's decision was simply recognising Tommy Robinson. Ben, what's your reaction?
I agree with all of that. And I think what it confirms is that there is at least one judge thinking straight in the judiciary, for which hurrah. But everything else it confirms is that we've got a broken criminal justice system. And when I first heard that Tommy Robinson had been charged under the Terrorism Act 2000, I think it's Schedule 7 you mentioned, which just for viewers who aren't familiar with it, effectively allow a particular branch of the constabulary to stop you and suspend all the normal rights you might have as a human being, all the rights which they all bang on about. You and I discussed the other day, Human Rights Act and all the rest of it, all of it suspended under the Terrorism Act, and they can detain you and do effectively what they wish with you. And if you don't give them access to your telephone, I think in Tommy Robinson's case, it was the PIN to his telephone, they can bring charges. And the judge was absolutely right to point out that this was politically motivated, and he was absolutely right to throw it out. Anyone who first saw the case being brought knew that it was politically motivated. The thing that, and it confirms, as I say, that we've got a two-tier criminal justice system, one where the police are acting, based on political activism as opposed to enforcing the law. But the other thing I think that's really revealing about this case is that Tommy Robinson, whether you like him or loathe him, is well known right across the United Kingdom and in every part of the political sphere. And there hasn't been, with my exception, I think, there hasn't been a single leader of a political party that's come out and said he was treated badly. This is a sign of a criminal justice system that's not working. And this is something that needs to be fixed for all of us, not just for Tommy Robinson. It needs to be fixed for all of us. A law used inappropriately in the way that it was against him will one day be used, or already has been, against other British citizens. And that takeaway doesn't seem to have got into the minds of the leaders of the other political parties. And they're so themselves cowed by cancel culture that they're not prepared to stand up on this case because they fear they'll be cancelled if they support in any way Tommy Robinson, who, as I think I've said on your program before, has somehow become the Voldemort of political commentariat as well as the political sphere. And, and that's where we are going to fail as a country if we don't have political leaders that can separate what is socially acceptable and what their peers may think is the dinner party class count as acceptable sort of social company and so on. If they can't separate that from the principles that should apply equally to all British citizens, we're done for. We've got to have politicians and leaders in particular who can make that separation and call it out for what it is. So lots of people have said to me, Ben, it's political suicide that you have supported Tommy Robinson when he was incarcerated last year, which in my view was also politically motivated. It's political suicide that you've allowed him to become a member of your party, even though that is his human right. It's political suicide that you've now called out the system when he was arrested on these terrorism charges. And I keep hearing it's political suicide, it's political suicide. Well, I tell you what is political suicide is not standing up for the British people. Ultimately, that is the suicide of our system, our constitution, equality under the law. And that's a kind of mass, that's a crime against the masses of this country. So I'm delighted that he has had these charges thrown out of court. I'm delighted that the judge cited what he cited, correctly cited, that effectively this was a politically motivated personal attack on Tommy Robinson. And I'm very disappointed that not any of the other political leaders have come out and denounced it the way I have. Kemi Badenoch should be coming out and denouncing it. Farage, who said the other day that actually this wasn't a terrorism issue. He was stopped because there's something wrong with his passport. He was being interviewed on a podcast and he got it wrong. He should come out and say, well, I made a mistake. Actually, it was terrorism charges and Tommy Robinson was falsely accused. Doesn't matter whether we know Farage hates Tommy Robinson, but why can't the leaders of political parties act on principle? They've got to do it.
Yeah, I know, absolutely right. And it's the big fear for journalists that people get access to their phone because obviously they've got all their contacts and sources and so on and so forth. Tommy made a couple of points when he came out of court. He, first of all, thanked Elon Musk for his support and the great legal team that he had. But he also made the point that the cost of this particular trial for him was £100,000. What's your reaction to that?
Well, the process is the punishment. So even before you've been found guilty, or if there's been an adjudication, you've already suffered great harm. £100,000 would break the vast majority of people in the country, and that's the power the police have.
Yeah, absolutely. So going forward then, if Advance get into power, what would you do to rectify this?
Well, that Terrorism Act goes. It's part of the panoply of harms perpetrated by Tony Blair and his successors against this country. The Act of Parliament was passed in the year 2000. It's Tony Blair's door. It's so bizarre, isn't it, Andrew, that they passed the Human Rights Act, which brings into law all these things that they prevent us from being able to even define what a British citizen is because everyone in the world now suddenly has all the rights of a British citizen. And then 2 years later, they pass a law which effectively allows the police to suspend any right at their discretion. It is an assault on our state, the Human Rights Act, and then it's another assault on our state, the Terrorism Act. They both have to go.
Yeah. Okay. You're very, very clear on that sort of side. Get that clarity. You mentioned Nigel Farage. A couple of quick reactions then to his speech yesterday, November the 3rd. He defended scaling back on reform's 90 billion tax cut pledges as aspirations that are not realistic. What was your reaction to that?
Well, again, so what Farage seems to have forgotten is that the way this country got into trouble was taxes being too high. Of course, I acknowledge spending needs to be cut. The welfare state needs to be cut back. Those who can work should work, and they shouldn't be paid benefits to stay at home. All of that is self-evident. But this country is not going to get back on its feet unless we cut taxes. Now, the reason Farage has rode back on that is for the same reason he's rode back on all the other things the British people would wish him to do, is because the mainstream commentariat will not abide the notion of tax cuts. It goes against the settled received wisdom of borrow, tax and spend. The socialist sort of hard left agenda to which this country has been subjected over the last 30 years. Instead of taking the knee yet again to the mainstream, which Farage did, he should have said, no, I'm going to stand my ground. We do need to cut taxes. We do need to cut costs, obviously, but we must cut taxes. The first thing Maggie Thatcher did when she got into government was cut income tax. May 1979, she won the election, she had a budget, and the first thing she did was cut income tax because she knew she had to get the country working again. And that's what we need to do. We've got to cut taxes on the working and middle classes. We've got to make it possible for them to keep enough money to make ends meet. I saw an analysis today put out by the National Audit Office, which shows the median wage versus the median costs of a British family, and they have nothing to spare. There is no fat on the bones. They just about survive. And these tax cuts that these tax increases that Rachel Reeves is now coming in with, is going to kill the goose that lays the golden egg.
Yeah.
And Farage needs to understand that. It doesn't matter what the mainstream say. It doesn't matter what your political peers think. What matters is saying and doing the right thing. And the right thing right now for this country is to cut back spending, but also cut back taxes. We've got to cut the tax burden on the British taxpayer.
Yeah, no, you've made that very, very clear. Well, the other thing, I mean, you put the British workers first. You've always said that on this programme. Farage, in his speech, he thought that the minimum wage might be too high for young people. It's currently £10 an hour for 18 to 20s and £7.55 for under 18s and apprenticeships, especially with national insurance thresholds at £5,000. He said it should be cut. What are your views on that? Is that a betrayal of the working class people?
Well, the minimum wage, I think, works in a peculiar way. It gives the impression that workers' rights are being protected because there's a minimum wage that employers need to pay. And perhaps there's a case for a day minimum wage, but the minimum wage now is actually edging up into competing with other jobs because we've become such a poor country. And the minimum wage, I think, now may be beginning to militate against employers employing people because it simply doesn't add up to be doing it. And I don't know if you remember, Andrew, but before the minimum wage was brought in, there was a huge debate about the principles of whether or not there should be a minimum wage. You know, we should, to a significant extent, let the market determine what wages should be. But what the government needs to do is create the environment in the markets which support proper wages and support proper net wages, so that once people have earned a fair earned a fair day's wage, that they can keep it. And the government's done two things which are deeply damaging to the working class. The first is mass migration of effectively unskilled people, pulling the rug out from underneath the employment market, making it impossible for wages to go up. So we've had wage stagnation for years. For years, we've had wage stagnation. And then the government, which is incapable of living within its means, taxing people more and more and more and more. So you end up in a vicious cycle where actually your net wages are going down, down, and down. And of course, inflation relentlessly keeps going up. And that's the cycle into which the ideology of borrow, tax, and spend has taken us. And that's the ideology against people like Farage need to stand. And I would remind Farage, if he watches this program, that in the People's Contract last year, he called that a People's Contract, not a manifesto, because he said people, politicians habitually renege on their manifesto commitments. I'm calling this a contract with the people. Well, he's not even in government yet, and he's broken his contract with the people. I just hold my head in despair when I see what reform get up to.
Well, the other thing is just finally, because I know you have to rush off, and thank you for coming on to make those comments. But finally, then he says it's no longer a one-man band. He names figures like my friend David Bull, Lee Anderson, Richard Tice, Danny Kruger, and Zia Yusuf. From your experience inside the party, is this genuine broadening, or does it mask his dictatorial control?
There are always some faces around Farage, but the reality is Farage is reform, reform is Farage. Kissing goes by his favour. That's it. If you're not in favour with Farage, you're out. And it's sad actually that that's the best quality bunch of people he could put together, if that is his front bench.
Yeah, well, you stated that he's basically clearly unfit to govern Britain. In light of this speech, and his talks about tax cuts and hints at wage reduction, does it reinforce your view, or is he more of a brilliant and cunning campaigner than a leader capable of fixing the economy? And what makes Advance UK different?
So he's a fantastic campaigner. I mean, what he did yesterday was take the knee to the political commentariat. He said, "I'm not going to give you the ability to criticize my view that taxes should be cut." He withdrew himself from that debate, so he can't be scrutinized or challenged. But in doing so, he threw his principles under a bus, because the key thing that the country needs is tax cuts. And so, great campaigner, he's not the one to save the country.
Okay. Ben Habib, thank you as always for joining me.
Thank you.